Okay, we're doing more quotes from the Holy Grail of Wisdom quotes by me, Pete Rogers. We're doing John Stuart Mill, alphabetical order. We're going to do him in three parts because he's got a lot of quotes. John Stuart Mill was a British philosopher. You know, he's a Protestant. He was a bit of an atheist. He is a very smart guy. He was considered a genius during his lifetime. When he was a child, he was a prodigy. His father put a lot of time and emphasis to get him educated at a very young age. He could speak Greek when he was a young guy. So he did read quite extensively. His father's was, friends with Jeremy Bentham and part of that school of utilitarianism that went down the path of the panopticon, all that stuff. Okay, here's a couple words of him on happiness. He himself had some intense depression as a young man. I think it was he was like overeducated and underlived. He hadn't done much outside of his education. So here's a quote on happiness. Those are only happy who have their minds fixed on some subject other than their own happiness. On the happiness of others, on the improvement of mankind, or even on some art or pursuit, follow not as a means but as an ideal end. Aiming thus at something else, they find happiness by the way. He had another quote, I didn't have it in here, but he said something like, if you ask yourself, are you happy? You cease to be happy. Yeah, and I'd agree with that. What makes you happy is pursuing some good purpose, some good goal, and you just enjoy the path. Also, living up to your own expectations of yourself. You know, in the context of your own life, with your own talent, your own situation, you're doing the best you can. Then you like and you respect yourself. Like the old Schopenhauer quote, forget about a happy life, seek a heroic life. And basically, if you do the best you can with what you got where you are, then you respect yourself and you like yourself. But if you keep on saying, am I happy, then you're not going to be happy, okay? And like, I have a girlfriend, she would ask me that. I would annoy me because she'd keep asking me that. I was like, stop asking me that, okay? Women, can't live with them, can't live without them. Like machines designed to empty our wallets. Okay, John Mill on self-development. He says, he who lets the world or his own portion of it choose his plan of life for him has no need of any other faculty than the ape, like one of imitation. Yeah, this is like Kierkegaard, basically saying, to just go along with the flow, go with the flow and do what everyone else does and what's expected of you. It's like falling asleep on a hay wagon versus to pursue your own individual goals is like riding a wild stallion. Okay, so let's continue with Mill. He says, a general state education is a mere contrivance for molding people to be exactly like one another, and as the mold in which it casts them is that which pleases the dominant power in government. Yeah, government just sends people to public schools to make them into chumps, to prepare them to be, minimum wage slaves. All right, next one. A state which dwarfs its men in order that they may be more docile instruments in its hands, even for beneficial purposes, will find that with small men no great thing can really be accomplished. Yeah, it's not a coincidence. You got major neurotoxins in your water, fluoride and aluminum. It's to make you stupid and docile and easy to control, And people don't even realize that. That's like kind of amazes me, Okay, let's continue here with John Stuart Mill. He says, he who chooses his plan for himself employs all his faculties. He must use observation to see, reasoning and judgment to foresee, activity to gather materials for decision, discrimination to decide, and when he has decided, firmness and self-control to hold to his decision. The study of science teaches young men to think, while the study of classics teaches them to express thought. Now, I think that's a really good one right there. You have to learn your field, whatever it might be, but it's highly valuable to read fiction and read some of this classical stuff and learn quotes because you become more articulate. You don't become so weak. In my experience, most people are really weak. They can exist in their little social sphere, but when trouble comes, they can't defend themselves. They're not articulate enough. They can't speak effectively. They can't write effectively. They're really sort of passive victims. Okay, you want to have the ability that you could speak, you could argue. Okay, yeah, I had the experience with my kids that I would sort of tease them in the kitchen, play verbal questioning games like Socrates. And they would sometimes get annoyed with me and snap at me and yell at me. But as they got older, they would say to me, gosh, Dad, all those conversations in the kitchen when you were teasing us and asking us questions, that turned out to be really good. And making jokes and snappy answers and stuff, that turned out to be really good. Because now when we talk to our friends, we can joke back and make snappy answers and stuff. Okay, John Mill on genius. The idea that truth always triumphs over persecution is one of those pleasant falsehoods which most experience refutes. History is teeming of instances of truth put down by persecution, and if not put down forever, it may be set back for centuries. And that's what I've seen. I'm reading recently like this philosophy book and history book, and I'll see that, the ancient Greeks, their knowledge and a lot of that stuff from the Romans, it was almost totally lost. If it wasn't for the Irish monks, a lot of this Aristotle and Plato stuff, and also Constantinople, a lot of the stuff would totally be lost. People don't realize how fragile the truth is. Like we talk about in nutrition. If Dr. McDougall hadn't preserved the work of, like Walter Kempner, Nathan Pritikin, Dennis Burkitt, Roy Swank, it might have disappeared, okay? I've been amazed at how fragile the truth is. And that's why it's good to have hardcover copies of books. That's why it's good to save things on an external hard drive. That's why it's good to have a knowledge management system. So you keep on accumulating information. You can keep learning. Okay, persons of genius are a small minority, but in order to have them, it is necessary to preserve the soil in which they grow. Genius can only breathe freely in an atmosphere of freedom. So yeah, that's the thing about genius is, see, like a regular person with an average IQ, let's say of 100, they're never going to do anything interesting or say anything interesting, okay? Because they're only going to repeat stuff within a narrow range, all right? Versus the smarter a person gets, the more they realize that conventional thinking, conventional systems, conventional institutions are pretty much of a joke quite often. So they're constantly going to be outside of that bell curve of safe things to talk about, of political correctness, okay? The standard protocol for coronary artery disease is, medications, stents, and CABGs. What's the cure rate for all three of those things? It's 0. Okay. The great creative individual is capable of more wisdom and virtue than collective man can ever be. Okay? That's a little bit like the Galileo quote where he said, if thinking were just like pulling a load, then the more horses you have, the more people you have, the better. But he says, no, thinking is like running a race like a stallion, and the fast stallion can outrun, 1,000 plow horses. Okay. In this age, the mere example of nonconformity, the mere refusal to bend the knee to custom is itself a service, precisely because the tyranny of opinion is such as to make eccentricity a reproach. It is desirable, in order to break through the tyranny, that people should be eccentric. Eccentricity has always abounded, when and where strength of character has abounded. And the amount of eccentricity in a society has generally been proportional to the amount of genius, mental vigor, and moral courage it contained. That so few dare to be eccentric marks the chief danger of this time. So a good example of an eccentric would be Diogenes in Athens, the homeless street philosopher, okay, who was real funny, and he walked around with a lamp saying he's looking for one honest man. Or if you went to Victorian England, an example of an eccentric would be Oscar Wilde, the Irish homosexual who was always making rapid jokes, okay? In a society that allows people to be different like that is good. You want some variety of personality and all that. They're not doing any harm. They're just going over things their own way. Okay, so that's it for part 1 of John Stuart Mill's. Hope you found that helpful.